So then the next thing that's moved up sharply, although it did correct a little bit, was the public markets. That was up, I think, as high as 10 or 15%, 20% for me with the Magnificent Seven, especially. The S&P 500 was obviously a bit more mild than that. As I alluded to earlier, this is great news for startup founders and larger scale ups because the public markets essentially set the valuation ceiling, right? They're saying a Google, a Facebook, or what have you is worth this much. Well, everything else is valued relative to that. And it's valued relative to that because your startup ultimately has to exit into that market. And so therefore your IPO has to achieve massive multiples. Or it has to exit into one of these larger companies. And so now that Lena Khan is going away and the valuation of these companies is going up, you have more headroom to exit into, which means that VCs will deploy more capital at higher valuations, which means that early stage VCs and angel investors will deploy more capital at higher valuations, which means you get more capital all along the way at higher valuations. And so this entire compression that's been happening decompresses and thaws. And it thaws from the top down. And so this is very, very good news for startup founders. You have that tailwind as well as, of course, the AI tailwind and some of the fintech and crypto tailwind. This is just good all around for FOMO, and of course is likely to create another big bubble. And bubbles are fine. In Australia we try to eliminate bubbles, but in Silicon Valley and in the US, bubbles are part of the process. Everyone gets exuberant and excited, 1,000 flowers bloom, and then a whole bunch of decimation occurs, and the strong ones survive. And so this is kind of baked in, and where all the hot air is rushing in, thanks to all the tailwinds before Trump, and now the tailwinds thanks to Trump.
Actually, I was just going to say, and you kind of alluded to it at the end, it's not like the market was depressed before Trump won the election. In fact, the market has been on a tear for the last few years, which is one of the points that Harris and the Biden campaign
Yes.
tried unsuccessfully to make. It's like, you know what? Things are pretty good. And so the market was at all-time highs or near all-time highs, and then Trump won and they popped even more. And so what we have is a market that by any traditional metrics is massively overvalued, right? It was already frothy and now it's even frothier. So yes, it's good news, Chris. I think the question is going to be, can it stay here? Every time some of these metrics such as price to earnings ratios and so on have been this high, it has shortly been followed by a correction or a crash. And so, yeah, we'll need to see whether all this excitement keeps up. But as for right now, I would say if you're thinking, well, should I kick off a raise now or should I wait till early next year? Here's some very tactical advice. I would take some of the excitement that's happening now. And if you are ready, or if you can make yourself ready to raise soon, I would personally strike while the iron is hot there.
Yeah, now's the time to raise for all of those macroeconomic reasons. And especially because we don't know what turbulence might be ahead, if any, with the political, the reality of the Trump presidency, Trump 2. So, yeah, dive in now. I would say that's generally good advice at any time, Yaniv, which is if there is capital on the table at the right valuations, I would take it. One of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career is to say no to a term sheet, thinking I could go get better or we could raise later. I would, take the money, take it. It is better in your bank account than theirs. And so now is a good time, definitely.
I guess my point is more specifically is the good times might not last.
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong. I do hope I'm wrong, but there are a number of reasons to think, some of Trump's policies, if enacted, such as actually massively cutting government spending, such as forcibly removing illegal immigrants, these are inflationary and depressive policies, right? And so actually the economic consequences of these things could be fairly negative. I actually think the markets are betting it won't really happen. And so going back to my commentary earlier on, Chris, is there's this sort of weird game of chicken happening, which is last time Donald Trump got elected, he said he was going to do a bunch of stuff and he didn't do it. Not really. This time he's got elected and people are betting that he's not really going to do it again. But what if he does? And I'd be inclined to think this time he's much more likely to actually do the things, the fairly wild and radical things that he said he's going to do than last time around in 2016.
If we're talking about startups and the implications for founders and VCs, we're in a sugar high right now. Everything is up. go raise money, go pitch your startups, go enjoy your Bitcoin, but keep an eye out because political and social unrest is possible, and I would say not unlikely. And so pay attention carefully to the news. And then also the last thing I'd say is while you're paying attention, don't be a victim of psychological warfare. So one thing I decided this cycle, unlike last cycle, is I'm going to watch it with a great deal of academic detachment because I cannot afford to get emotionally entangled with it again. And you got to focus on your family and what you can control.
Yeah, I think as often happens in these discussions, Chris, we meander a bit through the politics and our own personal feelings, but I think we've gotten to a fairly sharp, startup-specific, founder-specific piece of advice, right? Which is that the thing that changes is that volatility is going to be much higher, right? Volatility and uncertainty. So there's this concept in markets of volatility, which is really, it's not about whether it goes up or down, but about how much it moves around, how unpredictable the market is. And I think the volatility in the world has gone way up. So right now, things are good. Things could get really incredibly good, right? Or things could get really pretty bad. And I'd say that sort of the error bars around the next 4 years are much wider than they would have been under a President Harris or, a President Romney or anyone from like a normal political background. And so you need to be prepared for a world of higher volatility. And that means taking those wins when you can, but discounting the future a whole lot more, right? I think high volatility means focus on the present, focus on what you can achieve now, take things to the bank, and do not rely on forecasts. Like we mock on this podcast all the time, Chris, the idea that a pre-revenue startup or a pre-product market fit startup can have a 5-year forecast. But I think the visibility into the future has gotten even lower, right? The stock market now is at an all-time high. It could go up another 20%. It could go down 50% next week. And I think both of those are really, really quite plausible outcomes at the moment. These are not like at the extreme tails anymore. This could happen pretty easily. And so when you are plotting out your strategy, I actually think it just makes everything harder, but it really puts the premium on now a lot higher than it would in a predictable low volatility environment. So that, at least from me, Chris, I think you agree, is sort of the advice to founders on how to act in this new world.